Before we dive into the actual training footage, I wanted to touch base on my training methodology now versus, say, 20 years ago in my mid-20s. Obviously, there's some pretty stark differences as far as how I train now versus how I would have trained 20 years ago. And I want to go over a lot of those things before we actually get into the footage. The number one focus of my training is actually injury prevention. That was not my focus or my number one focus, obviously, 20 years ago. So you may think, well, Skip, why aren't you focused on progression? Because I've had too many injuries and I've been training too long. Okay? Obviously, the progression is important. It's one of my main focuses as far as my training. But I put it second to injury prevention because if I'm injured, whether it's a major injury with my lower back or a minor injury that's just nagging me from a knee to a shoulder to even tendonitis or old man-itis, as I like to refer to it, it's going to get in the way of my progress anyway. Okay? When I was younger, training through aches and pains was a lot easier. Recovery seemed to be better. These days, that just isn't the case. If I have to deal with inflammation or tendonitis, it doesn't seem to clear itself anywhere near as quickly as it used to. And not only that, but it usually means that I have to take time off. I have to actually get away from the area that's inflamed, let it die down, and then I can go back and train hard again. Otherwise, I'll have inflammation that'll nag me for 2 months. Obviously, you don't get a whole lot of kick-ass training done if that's the case. So the number one issue is injury prevention, and I'm going to start with the most obvious right off the bat, and that's just warm-ups. Okay, this may seem incredibly obvious, but I'm going over it anyway. Warming up when you're 25, 2-3 sets, bench, work your way up, you're ready to go. Warming up for me, when I'm 46, and 47, how fucking old am I? Anyway, is quite a bit different. And it's an actual day-to-day type thing or week-to-week type issue. There may be a couple of weeks where I warm up, I'm just fine. Take 4 or 5 warm-ups, ready to go. Obviously, it depends on the body part as well. If I'm getting ready for legs, it takes longer to warm up my knees than it does to, say, warm up my back, biceps, and shoulders when I'm getting ready to start a back session. So the warm-ups are going to be changing just essentially just based on how I feel that day. I mean, there have been times where it takes me as long to warm up my legs and knees as it does to actually train them. In fact, there are times where I just warm up and warm up and warm up, and then I just go home. I don't want to gamble. If it just seems obvious that I'm not warming up, things just don't feel right, I'm going home, coming back the next day and do it. It doesn't happen very often, but when the signs are there and they're blinking and they're bright and they're in your face, don't do it, you're a fucking idiot. I'm going to listen to that and come back the next day. Now, if it's just something simple that I think I can work through, that's what training for 30 years can do. I got a pretty good idea of where I'm at. Psychologically, I don't have anywhere near as many roadblocks after training for 30 years as I did when I was younger. I tend to deal with stress and outward issues, and when I say outward issues, issues outside of the gym that don't have anything to do with injury or that sort of thing. I manage stress a lot better. I've also been married for 23 years, so I don't have issues with relationships or things of that nature that I think I did maybe when I was younger. So, excuse me, it's easier for me to focus on what I need to focus on in the gym and not be as sidetracked or deal with those mental obstacles. So primarily these days, I'm only dealing with the physical issues. If things hurt real bad, maybe I'll go light that day. Obviously, there are things that I can change and train and still stay on schedule, but I'm not going to fight it if it's that bad. I'll just come back tomorrow and do it tomorrow and not have to worry about it. And if it's not tomorrow, maybe I skip it for the week. Doesn't happen very often, but again, it's me listening to those physical cues and adjusting kind of on the fly. Aside from warm-ups, one of the main things that is different now with my training is I don't handle the heavy weights, or what I like to refer as heavy slag iron. It's been said, that to get big the quickest and make the biggest progression that you can as far as acquiring muscle mass, that it needs to be heavy slag iron. I'm not picking on anybody. Dante uses that term. And if I was 25, that would hold true, and I would be training as heavy as I could, like I did when I was younger. That doesn't happen these days because the number one way for me to get injured is to try to move heavy weight. I can deal with intensity. I can deal with intensity techniques. That will help me to continue to progress and grow without having to push the ridiculously heavy weights where I risk injury. I would say that 95% of my risk of injury is going to be a weight that's too heavy. It may not be a weight that's too heavy for my legs while I'm training legs, but it could be a weight that is too heavy for my back while I'm training legs. Things of that nature. So not only do I focus on intensity techniques to basically provide the stimulus to help me to continue to progress, not only hang on to the muscle that I have, but look, I've been training for 30 years. You might be thinking, oh, come on, how much are you really progressing, Skip? If I didn't think I was progressing, I don't know that I would continue to do it. Now, I might do it to stay in shape and that sort of thing, but the challenge of still continuing to try to improve, even after training for 30 years, is something that still keeps me going. It keeps me focused. It keeps me motivated. So, am I going to progress much? Am I going to progress a lot? Probably not. But I still, when I go in the gym, my main motivation is that I want to be better. I want to be stronger. I want to outdo weights that I have done before, or maybe even repetitions, maybe not even necessarily weights. Because again, I'm not going to be putting up the weights that I was putting up, not only when I was younger, but when I was cycling. This is TRT bodybuilding. Okay, I can't give the impression either to you or even to myself, because it wouldn't be accurate and it wouldn't be fair, that I'm going to be able to have the same muscle or put up the same weights that I was putting up when I was cycling. So when I talk about progression as far as weights and even getting bigger, I'm talking about primarily since I have transitioned to TRT bodybuilding. Okay, that's been a couple years now that I've been dealing with the TRT dosing, the TRT blood levels, that sort of thing. So now it's not a challenge of improving upon when I was cycling, but improving upon, a couple years ago or a year ago, since I've been on these TRT doses. I want to continue to grow and progress, even though I'm only on these TRT doses. And I've been doing that. So a lot of this DVD and the training and the nutrition and the hormonal control, that sort of thing, I'm trying to show that you can still progress and grow while on TRT dosing, TRT bodybuilding, but obviously you're not going to hang on to what you had as far as size, muscularity, and strength that you were when you were cycling. Okay, if anybody tells you that, that's just a straight up lie. That just can't, it obviously can't happen. A couple of the primary techniques that I focus on with my training as far as what I consider to be intensity techniques are things like time under tension, controlled repetitions, things of that nature. I can't go above and beyond as far as going beyond failure. I don't have the recovery capabilities to be able to do that. Even in my prime, when I was younger, cycling, that sort of thing, I still overtrained very, very quickly once I used techniques that took me past muscular failure. Okay, and some of those techniques, just to give you an idea so that we're on the same page, I could get by with forced repetitions every now and then. If I couldn't get a rep, I get a rep, that's cool. You start to talk about 2 and 3 repetitions past failure, a lot of sets of partials or drop sets, rest pause, things of that nature. It wouldn't take me 3 weeks and I would be bordering on overtraining. Everybody is different, but it may be one of those reasons that I was never cut out to be a pro. I was never cut out to bodybuild at an elite level because I just never really had that recovery capability. Now, if I didn't have that then, when I was younger and cycling, then I damn sure don't have it now. So that means I have to take into consideration not only my training frequency, as far as how frequent I train muscle groups, but the volume or the total workload done, that sort of thing. And not only that, but I need to, that is in comparison to the caloric intake that I now have to maintain body fat levels, which is admittedly significantly lower than it was 20 years ago. I remember getting ready for shows and eating 300 and 400 grams of carbs, and I would drop 50 or 60 grams of carbs and drop 3 pounds. Well, let me be more clear on that. 50 or 60 grams of carbs I would drop per day, and after a week of doing that, I would be down 2 or 3 pounds. Okay, I'm not even close to that anymore. Part of it is age, obviously, and the changes that I have dealt with metabolically, but it's also even little things like working from home. I mean, I don't even park my car in a parking lot and have to walk to a building to go to an elevator to go to a cubicle. Not that I ever had a cubicle job anyway, but you get my point. My idea of cardio or actually moving during the day is like going grocery shopping or going to the post office or taking the garbage cans up to the top of the driveway. I don't move a lot. So you combine being relatively active and being young. I'm in a job where I actually moved. I used to chase little rotten ass kids. They weren't rotten ass kids, actually. Abused and neglected kids. I worked with that population for quite a while. It was a pretty active job. I'd have to chase kids around, misbehaving, things like that. I was on my feet a lot. Combine that with being younger, and obviously I was burning a lot more calories than now that I'm 10 or 15 years later. I'm getting into my later 40s, and I just sit. I mean, the most I have moved in the last 15 minutes is this hand right here. This is typical of my daily activity. I just don't move very much. Obviously then, the amount of calories that it takes to maintain a lean condition now versus when I was active and younger is significantly different. There's a huge disparity there. So when those calories come down and I need to maintain a level of leanness on so much less of a caloric intake, obviously that's going to cut into recovery as well. So now I have TRT dosing, which when you come from cycling to TRT dosing, obviously your recovery isn't going to be as good. I'm older, recovery isn't as good. I have to take in less calories to maintain a lean condition, which makes my recovery not as good as if I were taking in a lot more calories. So I've got all these things working against me that when you fit them all together, they have to fit the best you can between your training, your nutrition, your supplementation, whether it be TRT or over-the-counter supplementation. It all needs to fit together so much more precisely, and to make sure that you're optimizing your training so much more. It just matters. It matters. It's so significant now. I could have gotten it wrong 20 years ago, 15 years ago. You got things that can make up for you not being incredibly efficient with training, nutrition, everything else. Gear will make up for things like that. Metabolism will make up for not having your diet be exactly what it should be. I don't have that luxury now, which is why it has taken a couple years. It's actually good that I wasn't able to do, I had some things that came up that actually, postponed me being able to do this DVD a couple years ago like I wanted to. And it's a good thing because I learned so much more in the last couple years with trying to piece everything together and get everything right and get everything so incredibly efficient that I think the information that I'm providing now with the DRD DVD, I gotta slow down, 2 years later, is significantly better information than had I been able to do this a couple of years ago and get the information out then. So, I mean, for it to take me, almost 2 years to get this right and to get it fit together so precisely or so perfectly, should tell you that based on what I know and my knowledge from doing this for years and years and years, it's a lot more complicated and a lot more complex than even I thought it was, to be honest with you. Oh, I have to drop the TRT dosing. Okay, I'll probably have to change my training a little bit, not train as frequently. There's just way more to it than that, which you'll see as you get into the DVD. So my techniques as far as intensity to keep that stimulus there, to keep progressing, and to provide a stimulus for the muscle so it can continue to grow, in size, to help keep as much size as I possibly can from my days of, banging away while cycling, things like that. I primarily am focusing on that time under tension. I'm primarily focused on the controlled repetitions. If someone were to see me in the gym, a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old, and watch me bench press, they would probably be a bit confused, like, why? Gosh, if he did those reps faster, he'd be able to get more weight on it. He would be so much stronger. He could put more weight on the bar. I tend to, as an example, I do stock reps. I don't touch my chest, come back up. I touch my chest, I hesitate, I come up. That's another technique that I use that allows me to not put as much weight on the bar. I have more control that way. I feel that my joints aren't jeopardized or in a vulnerable position that way. Essentially, I'm taking every exercise or every set that I do of every exercise and trying to find a way to make it more difficult by not putting weight on the bar. So make it more difficult, but not the easy way, which is just sliding plates on the bar. So it's either slowing down the repetition, it's doing different, maybe even a partial rep followed by a full rep. A lot of what I do now is left-right alternating repetitions each side. I won't do left side and then the right side, or the right side for a full set of 8 to 10 and then the left side for a full set of 8 to 10. That is something that my OCD-ness cannot handle, because you're always going to have a strength disparity from one side to the other. And with my OCD-ness, that doesn't work. If I go left, right, I can gauge better when I'm gonna fail. And we all have a little bit stronger side. We're gonna have a stronger side and a weaker side, whether it be legs, calves, shoulders, buys, whatever. Even if it's close, there's always one side that we favor that is stronger than the other. So in going left to right and alternating those repetitions, I can better gauge when I'm gonna fail on both sides. Okay, obviously I always start, or you want to start with your weaker side, finish with your stronger side. And if that means you need to slow down that side a little bit, okay, cool. I'm not going to make too much effort to slow down the strong side, but I am going to do what I call training the weak side, which is why these days my left and right side is actually very, very close. I don't even think most people could pick up on which side that I may be a little bit weaker on. My wife might, because she trains with me all the time. But even then, I'm not sure. What I tend to do is I will train the weak side, and by that I mean if my weak side is my right side and I start with that side and I'm alternating right or left, even if I'm not alternating, as soon as the weak side starts to fail is when you stop the set. Okay? The reason for that is when the weak side fails, there's the stimulus for the weak side to get stronger. If you continue, like most people do, and continue to bang crooked reps, or you're getting partials with your weak side and full reps with your strong side, what's happening? Yes, you're providing the stimulus for the weaker side to get stronger, but you're also providing the stimulus for the stronger side to get stronger. And in doing that, if you have your weak side here and your strong side here, all you're doing is this. both sides continue to get stronger, and you keep the imbalance. By training the weak side to the point of failure and not training the strong side to the point of failure, you're going to end up closing this gap eventually, which is what you want to do, because then that lessens the imbalance. Will it ever be perfect? Probably not. But I'm going to shoot for trying to get them perfect to the point where they're so damn close that I can barely tell the difference. And if I can't tell the difference, or I'm struggling to tell the difference, and I'm OCD, your ass can't tell the difference. Another thing that's important with my training these days is my rep ranges, okay? I can't come out of warm-ups like I used to and go into a 6 to 8 rep range, okay? When I was a teenager and I was coming out of the gates, Lee Haney was huge. Lee Haney training, for those that know, was 6 to 8 repetitions. It was just that time period, and most training was in those rep ranges. I could do it then, and I didn't have any type of injuries or that sort of thing. I could warm up, go into those rep ranges, no problem. If I tried to warm up now, no matter how good I would warm up, if I went straight into my first working set of 6 to 8 repetitions on a compound movement, I'd probably just rip some shit. I'd have a titty rip, or I'd blow a fucking disc in my back, excuse my language, blow a kneecap across the gym. I don't know. Shit would just fall apart, basically. And if it didn't, it would feel like it was going to. It would feel like crap. The repetitions wouldn't be terribly fluid. They wouldn't be, and by fluid I mean just smooth, and they would feel, whether they look like it or not, that type of crap. They may not look that way, but that's what they would feel like. So what I do is I want to train across all repetition range. By all repetition ranges, I mean primarily I want to hit 6 to 8 repetition range, 8 to 10 repetition range, and 10 to 12 repetition range. I will go higher than that. I'll F around and get up into the 15 and 20 repetition range, sometimes 25 repetition range, just for something different, a different stimulus, try to keep things off balance, but I don't do it very often. I find myself in that 6 to 12 rep range quite a bit. So what I'll do is I will warm up, get to my top set, and for the sake of numbers, to make my point here for reference, you know, if I'm bench pressing and I'm at, you know, I can warm up and I'm going to open at, say, 275. And I'm going to get that, you know, 11 or 12 times, or in that area somewhere. Those repetitions are going to feel pretty fluid. They're going to feel pretty strong. They're going to feel relatively heavy. It's not going to feel light to me. My light days of pressing, you know, an easy 275 or 315 are, I don't know that I ever pressed 315 easily, but I could press 315 for sometimes 12 or 15 reps, which for me was pretty good. I certainly am making no attempt to brag. Those aren't huge numbers, but to give you reference. So in the 10 to 12 rep range, opening up at 275, they're pretty smooth. And these are stop reps, like I said. So I'm making them more difficult. I'm not just lifting it to see how many times I can move it from my chest to lockout, but I'm using the weight or feeling the weight more than I'm actually lifting it. That's from a psychological standpoint. So the reps are fluid, the reps are controlled, the time under tension is real good. Like I said, somebody would look at me who was younger and just think, God, you know, he's doing those, why is he doing slow motion repetitions? And the reason he thinks that is because his ass isn't old yet. He doesn't deal with joint issues. He hasn't been training but for a couple of years. Essentially, he's made out of rubber, okay? Like I was and you were, all of us were at that age. We could get away with a lot of shit that we can't get away with now. And when I say get away with, it might not have been the most optimum way to train, but you could get away with it. You could grow, you could progress, and you could do some shit wrong. And those days are long over. If I do something wrong now, I'm usually paying the price. So at 275, when I can open in that, you know, right around that 12 rep range, and that's close to failure. That might not be me failing and my wife pulling a rep, but I know damn well that the rep I just locked out is the last full rep I'm going to get. Now, We can argue the psychological aspect of that. And, well, you don't know because you're not... Look, I've trained for 30 years. Okay, 32, 33 in there somewhere. There's a psychological component. I get that. When you've done it for 30 years, or as long as I have, then you can argue with me whether I could get another rep or not. I guess that's just the best way to explain it. I'm basically trumping you with my years of experience. It just is what it is. Okay? I'm not going to get another rep without someone having to pull it up. Therefore, that's when I stop. My next set, I know because I was that close to failure, I'm going to lose a couple reps. And it'll depend on how quickly I go from that set to the next set. Obviously, the longer time that I take, the better my recovery, the stronger I'll be going into the next set. I do tend to try to move quickly. I try to keep a pump. I basically try to go into the next set as soon as I have regained my breathing or control of my breathing, and I feel that I can go, pretty close to 100% on the next set. I don't like to do what I call powerlifting type rest between sets. I like to stay warm. I like to keep a pump. I feel that it helps to keep the intensity up. I do understand that I would be stronger and get a couple more reps if I rested longer. As much as I enjoy being in the gym, I just don't want to live there, so I'm trying to be as efficient with my time as possible. Plus, my workload for working sets is, pretty high. I'm a high volume trainer, and I'll get to that in a second. I don't want to spend 3 hours in the gym, so I do try to keep a pretty good pace. That next set is going to bring me down into that 9-10 repetition range. And my third and fourth set, they're going to drop into that 6 and 8 rep range without much problem at all. The reason I do that is because that allows me to eventually get into the 6 to 8 repetition range with nowhere near the risk of injury than if I would have opened in that 6 to 8 rep range. So, is it ideal for building muscle mass to hit to hit those lower rep ranges as you fatigue versus opening with them? It probably isn't. But it's ideal for me when my primary focus is trying to limit my risk of injury, keep it as low as possible. And I feel that doing it this way does that. It allows me to cover those rep ranges with a very minimal risk of injury. And that's my number one focus. Now, as far as volume, it's funny, I don't want to get into the trends or how training trends or the cycles and stuff like that. But the reality is we went through a high intensity, low volume phase for 10, 12 years. We had the Dorian Yates style training, we had the DC training, and all very effective training protocols, no question. I used DC training 3-4 years and made really, really good gains with it. The problem is that type of training, and I'm just speaking for me, I'm not going to speak for anybody else in my population as far as, in my 40s and things like that. Part of my issue is not the fact that I'm, in my late 40s and that's what makes me more prone to injury. It's also the fact that I've been training for so long. Okay, there are plenty of people who start training at 30, 35 and only have maybe 10 years invested and they're close to my age and they don't have the injuries that I have. They don't have the injuries that I have because they haven't done the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of repetitions that I've done that have beaten up my knees, joints, shoulders, lower back, that sort of thing. I'm going to come back to this statement, and anybody who saw the original longevity DVD knows that I use this term a lot in the original longevity DVD, and I still use it now 6 years later because it just stands the test of time. It's just a very accurate statement, and that is this: repetition in and of itself is degenerative. That means that you can squat correctly with beautiful form, but it still rips your knees and your back apart over time because it wears cartilage, even when it's done correctly. That means, 50,000 repetitions done perfectly with perfect form still will rip you apart over time. It still is degenerative on your knees, your lower back. It just, your ankles for that matter. Just like bench pressing is on your shoulders and your elbows. Just like arm training is on your elbows. Things of that nature. So that just backs up the fact that it's that much more important to train with good biomechanics, because if you don't, you're going to lose years. You're just going to lose them. I liken training years to dog years. If you're 47 and you've been training for 10 years, your body or your joints usually aren't as old or beat up as someone who had the same age who has been training for 2 or 3 times as long. The volume that I was talking about, and the training going through cycles, right now we have changed into a phase, and I give credit to Mountain Dog primarily for this change. It was his training protocol that's more volume based and with more training days than what we were in with the Dorian Yates style, the DC training style, the style that Skip LaCour used, which is escaping me at the moment. But the point is these training cycle trends, they happen every 10, 12, 15 years or so. Prior to the Dorian Yates style, where were we? We were in that 6 to 8 rep range, the Lee Haney days through the 80s. Where were we prior to that? It was the high volume Arnold days. Tons of sets. Take the squat, take a squat bar out to the beach and just squat all day. Things of that nature. So everything comes back around. So the higher volume training is coming back around now. I consider fortitude training to be higher volume as well. I even have, my training protocol as well is a progressive volume. So though it has components of low volume, it doesn't take long before, even with my protocol, you're building into these higher volumes. Yes, you'll reset every 6 to 8 weeks and come back down to a lower volume, but the large bulk of my training style is the higher volume. Why is that? Oh, it must be because Mountain Dog is brilliant. He is brilliant. So I certainly don't want that to sound sarcastic, because I have very little respect for a lot of people in the industry, but brilliance as far as training and nutrition and what John Meadows has done with his training and what he's done with the industry, I have nothing but respect for. So at the same time, my training and the change to volume was not impacted by John Meadows or by the training cycle changing, as much as I can't deal with the low volume, high intensity, big weights without a constant barrage of aches and pains, even minor injuries. So in my opinion, the population that I sit in right now, in the mid to late 40s, I highly and strongly recommend higher volume training, because I think it's safer. I think the risk of injury is so much lower that you're better off going with this higher volume, even more frequency. It's okay to deal with, and sometimes we do with this higher volume, higher frequency. We're dealing with inflammation a little bit more, elbows flare up, things like that, old man-itis issues. And old guys like myself, we're used to training higher volume. If I take the training trends over my last 32, 33 years, the large bulk of that is not high intensity, low volume training. That was only, maybe a third of that time. Everything else was kind of higher volumes. I'm used to that. Old school guys are used to that. We're used to being in the gym, 5, 6 days a week, sometimes even doubles. I don't prefer double sessions for training. I have way too many things to do, and kids and that sort of thing, and I live too far from the gym. But even if I live close to the gym, I don't know that that's something I would go after or be terribly fond of. The main reason is I don't have the recovery for that. But anyway, training with the higher volume, I believe strongly, lessens the risk of injury, because you're not pouring everything you have into not only the intensity for those 1, 2, or 3 sets per muscle group with high intensity training, but the weights that are involved as well. Again, once I open with those higher repetition ranges, the 10 to 12, usually around 12, and then I'm able to advance as I fatigue down into the 6 to 8 rep range, that to me is minimizing risk versus trying to open with those ridiculously heavy sets right after you're warm, and you think you're warm, but you're not really warm. Not as warm as you're going to be after 3 or 4 working sets anyway at 10 to 12 repetitions. So I am a much bigger fan of the higher volume. I highly recommend it, especially when you're trying to minimize injury, trying to stay in the gym, not have to take that time off to let injuries heal before you can go back in and pound, that sort of thing. The last thing I'm going to touch on is the old man itis, which is essentially tendonitis for old people. And the reason that it tends to flare up with us older guys more, obviously it's a recovery issue, just as much as it is we like to train more frequently, we like to train that higher volume, and tendonitis is inflammation. It's essentially an overuse injury. I should be careful with the word injury. I don't even like to consider tendonitis an injury, personally. I think it's just inflammation. And it doesn't usually lead, in my experience, to an injury. It just leads to more inflammation, more pain, more having to warm up. If you have inflammation and you're able to, a lot of times you can warm up and warm up around it. You just have to warm up longer. You got to get those joints nice and loose. You might have to wear a neoprene sleeve, and I say sleeve if it's your elbow or your knee or something to that effect, and warmth will help that. Try to come in to a cold gym, not warm up much, have tendonitis in your knees or your elbows, and try to bench or squat or leg press, and it'll be the death of you. It's the most painful thing ever. So warming up more and things like that. And what does warming up more do? You're taking an overuse situation or injury, an overuse situation that has caused the inflammation to begin with, and you're going to warm it up more, which is essentially counterintuitive to an overuse injury. It's piling on. Basically what you're doing with an inflammation or an itis issue is you're going to continue to make it worse. Do old guys like to take time off? No. Sometimes we don't mind training around shit. If your elbow's hurt, we might do more dumbbell flies. But even then, try to take compound exercises away from an old guy. It's like trying to take candy from a baby. It just doesn't work very well. Or Bud Light from my wife. That's probably a better analogy. There's a lot of crying and whimpering that goes on. A lot of begging. The old man itis issues, it's an overuse issue. It's a volume issue, that sort of thing. My best advice is, I know I'm going to take my own advice. This is what I do. I'm not going to take time off and let tendonitis rest and become less inflamed. I'm going to train around it, okay? If that means that my elbows are killing me, then for triceps, I may do some really, I call it fluffy exercises like kickbacks. Things that aren't going to stress my elbows much, but they're still going to allow me to work triceps, get a pump, that sort of thing, with a little bit different angle than I'm used to. Our kickback's going to really provide much growth or much progression? Hell no. But they are going to give you a pump. They are going to allow you to work that muscle and get around the inflamed or the exercises that will continue to really inflame that area and inflame that tendon. So things like, let's see, knees is difficult. Maybe something that leg extensions, a lot of this is individual. So some people are going to be able to, angle leg press, and they're going to, but they're not going to be able to do hacks. Or this is even a better one. When you have tendonitis in your knees are stiff, that sort of thing, a lot of times you can do the same exercises, but you can't do them in certain areas of that range of motion. So let me elaborate on that. As an example, if you're doing angle leg press, as an example, your knees will not tend to bother you in the bottom position usually. And when the bottom position, I mean when the weight is more in your chest or your knees are in your chest. But your knees will bother you in that top 1/3 position close to the lockout. So as an example, when I'm having problems with my knees and I feel that there's an inflammation or an itis issue, and a lot of times too, you're going to be able to tell if it's an itis issue or an injury based on whether you feel the pain or discomfort in one knee, elbow, shoulder, whatever, versus both. Okay, tendonitis is usually in both. The inflammation doesn't usually happen only on one side. It might be a little bit worse on one side than the other, but by and large, you're going to have it on both the left and the right side. If you have it on one side, that's usually a pretty good indication that you've got some kind of injury or something else going on besides just a minor inflammation or an itis issue. So in situations like that, I will just keep my repetitions in that range of motion that doesn't bother it, doesn't irritate it. You have to find a way, if you can, to get around these things and still train. Otherwise, like I say, the older we get, the older I get. You know, if I took time off every time something hurt or was inflamed or I had tendonitis or things just didn't feel right, I would train about 4 times a year. The standing joke with myself and the people that I train with is, I really believe that I should have come up with the skip. I don't know how I would label it. It always has to be labeled with something. The skip, you know, perfect joint protocol training method or some shit like that. I believe that if I trained every other week, my joints would always feel like $1,000,000, because when I take a week off from training and I come back, my knees feel like I could squat twice as much. My back can't. My elbows feel like I could bench twice as much, but my shoulders can't. Things like that. My joints just feel, by and large, feel like $1,000,000. But then I think, obviously I can't train every other week. I'm an old man. I can't do something like that. I have to train. But it does make me wonder, if I was able to get out of my head and train every other week and always have my joints feel really good, what would have happened? Anyway, I digress. The training footage is coming up. I will have plenty of feedback, and I'll be explaining everything I'm doing in the training footage as well. I just wanted to give you a heads up, give you my ideas and my philosophies on my training before you dive into the actual training footage. I hope I haven't missed anything. I hope you enjoy the training footage at Iron Prodigy. Let me kick that out again. Iron Prodigy Gym. My buddy Chris Abkos owns in Fort Collins. It is, without a doubt, my favorite gym in Colorado.